Hey, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining me today. My name is Ian Rude, and I am the founder and director of neuroscience for Pure Neurology LLC and Nuclear Health and Fitness, which is our health club located in Bentonville, Arkansas. I'm really glad that you're joining us today, and I'm really excited to share with you the presentation that I have today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll get right into it. So today I want to talk about a brief history of cannabis prohibition. And I have personal reasons behind choosing this topic, but working in the field of neuroscience, this is a hot button topic for pretty much anybody who is in the health and wellness industry. And I was looking at cannabis whenever I suffered an injury in my own life that I'll get into here in a little bit. I didn't have a whole lot of options. And so I started researching anything that was able to help me. And that's how I got into the business of doing what I do now, which is functional rehabilitation and fitness primarily. But I'm in a very unique health and wellness niche. And our company actually helps other people do everything from just getting their health back to finding alternative ways to work and make a living. And this was kind of born out of necessity for me. You can visit our blog at truehealthcenter.org, or you can visit any of our company websites, but you can get to everything from our blog. And this is something that I'm consistently building. So if there's not information there on a topic that you want to discuss, just go ahead and leave us a comment and I would be happy to share about it. I do have to start this video out with a disclaimer. Nothing provided today is going to be medical advice, should not be considered to be medical advice. The information, including but not limited to the text, the graphics, the images, and the other materials contained both in this presentation and on our websites are for educational and informational purposes only. No material being presented is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or another qualified healthcare provider with any questions that you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen. And please never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you've heard or read on one of our websites or any of our affiliated media outlets or accounts. So again, my name is Ian Rude. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a husband, and I absolutely love my life. I have to say that today I wouldn't trade it for anything. I was a paramedic for a number of years, and I worked both in the hospital and for municipalities. I've worked for several systems over the years, and my career in emergency medical services spanned about 12 years, all in all, until 2015, whenever I had a life-changing incident, and I could no longer follow that path. I was diagnosed with a condition called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and it's categorized on the McGill Pain Index at a 46 out of 50. It's considered the most painful form of chronic pain in existence. And this is kind of my little breakdown of a progression of what happened. Boom, OMG, ouch, WTF. It always starts with an injury. And in my case, I sprained my shoulder while I was working as a firefighter. I developed a nerve injury in the arm that didn't show up on an EMG electromyograph. So my complex regional pain syndrome was what they would categorize as type 1 complex regional pain syndrome because I did not have an identifiable nerve injury on an EMG. That's not to say that I didn't injure a nerve. It's just to say that it wasn't quantifiable on the test. And that's an important factor when anybody is dealing with pursuing a CRPS diagnosis. because doctors really don't understand this the best, and it presents differently in just about everybody who has it. It always starts with an injury. It can be a minor injury or a major injury, and it begins with progressive swelling, discoloration, temperature changes to the affected limb, and excruciating pain. The disease spreads to other areas of the body in more than 70% of the people who are affected. So it is considered a progressive disease. It is considered debilitating. It is chronic. It's also very difficult for people who have been diagnosed with this to get any kind of disability because the process is just so intense. The diagnosis is so difficult, and it presents differently in everybody that has it. So two people can have CRPS in the exact same limb, and it'll look different in two different cases. So that's why today I want to focus on just a brief history and overview of medical cannabis, and I want to discuss with you guys just dispelling some of the myths that are out there about medical cannabis. I want to start out by saying that the benefits of cannabis are scientifically proven, and we're going to show that to you today. Cannabis does have medicinal value. It's no more addictive than coffee. Cannabis is not a gateway drug. In fact, it's an exit drug. It's being used all over the world to pull people off of opiates, and it helps with addiction and withdrawal. It does not kill brain cells. Actually, there is research and evidence that shows that cannabis is neurogenic and synaptogenic, so it can actually help your nervous system heal and regenerate nerve tissue. Cannabis does not cause violence or crime, and contrary to belief, there are a lot of people who use medical cannabis who do not go out and rob gas stations. There is a underculture of crime and illegality that surrounds cannabis, but a lot of that has to do with prohibition, similar to alcohol prohibition. When that was in full swing, the government basically created a market for crime surrounding alcohol, and they have done the same thing with cannabis through prohibition. Cannabis does not necessarily cause anti-motivational syndrome. I bring this up because a lot of the things that I'm going to be addressing with cannabis in this series are going to be dealing with the stigma surrounding cannabis. And this has been a very difficult video for me to make. I've thought about doing it for several years, but even as a professional in my field, I'm also a Christian. I'm somebody who I was raised in church. I've gone to church my entire life. And so this has been a difficult journey for me and for my wife, regardless of what people think about cannabis use or consumption. There's going to be a lot of things I'm going to want to address, but I guess really the thing that I want to emphasize is the reason for my delay is because over the years I have been asked to leave churches. I've been asked to leave leadership in churches. I have been ostracized. I've dealt with stigma. I've been called an addict and told that I was faking my condition. And that's all because I advocated for individuals to be able to use medical cannabis as a treatment. That's not even due to stigma that developed over personal use or behaviors or anything like that. I'm a fairly bright individual, I like to think, whenever it comes to just activities of daily living and what I've been able to accomplish. I am an entrepreneur. I own my own business, and we serve clientele on multiple continents. So whenever I say I own my own business, I am working from my home right now. A lot of people are with COVID, but we service a wide range of people, most of whom have CRPS or other related conditions. And I specialize in a very unique form of rehabilitation, neuromuscular therapy, as I've already addressed in the video. So this is going to be a clear-eyed look at medical cannabis, if you will. I really want to dive into the science behind cannabis, why I think it's a viable treatment. I want to talk a little bit about the stigma, the legality, and we're going to start with, like I said, a history of the cannabis plant and why cannabis prohibition came around to begin with. Because this is something that's not going away and it has the potential to destroy a lot of people's lives. I think this is a message that needs to be heard. So we are going to be discussing cannabis sativa, and there are two main types of cannabis sativa. There is marijuana, as we know it, which is actually a slang term for the cannabis plant, and there's industrial hemp. A lot of the CBD products that you're going to find on the market are marketed as hemp, but that actually comes back to a 2014 Farm Bill that states that products that have high levels of CBD and low levels of THC, particularly below 0.03 milligrams per deciliter, can be classified as industrial hemp. But whenever you're seeking out cannabis products, you want to make sure that your products have actually come from a marijuana plant. Charlotte's Web is a strain of a female marijuana plant that has been bred to be very high in CBD and very low in THC. And that particular strain has been helping kids with seizures, different kinds of things. But typically the way that the two strains are, or the two sexes rather, are identified is hemp would be a male plant that's grown for industrial purposes because it reproduces quickly and doesn't have the ability to develop high levels of cannabinoids, which are actually the therapeutic properties of the plant. Medical cannabis should be grown out of the female flowering plant, and it should be grown sensimilia without seeds. So there should be no males in the crop. And if any males pop up, you have to get them out very quickly because otherwise the plant will kind of sterilize and the cannabinoids will not be able to produce in the quantities that are needed for a therapeutic use. I hope that makes pretty good sense. So in 1619, the first law in America concerning Indian hemp, Cannabis indica, came into effect. Growing cannabis became mandatory in Virginia, requiring every farmer to grow hemp. It was actually grown ubiquitously throughout the colonies. And in 1631, hemp was used as currency throughout the American colonies. They printed currency on it. So it was once so valuable that it was right on the money. You can actually see the hemp bushels on the back of the $10 bill. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was actually drafted on hemp paper. And in 1783, cannabis was reclassified into two main species, sativa and indica. In 1791, President Jefferson called hemp a necessity and urged farmers to grow it everywhere instead of tobacco. In 1794, George Washington wrote, "Make the most of the Indian hemp seed and sow it everywhere." In 1860, the first governmental commission on the study of cannabis and hashish gave a report, and it cataloged medical conditions which cannabis was beneficial for. Some of these medical conditions are things that you wouldn't expect. Chronic bronchitis, obviously that was a tincture that they were giving, not necessarily having people smoke a joint, but it's interesting whenever you look at some of the properties of smoking cannabis. I'm not saying that's a good way to get your medicine. We'll go into that in a later presentation, but just covering a few of these: chronic bronchitis, muscular spasms, epilepsy, convulsions, palsy, uterine hemorrhage, dysmenorrhea, hysteria, neuralgia, nervous rheumatism, mania, whooping cough, asthma, alcohol withdrawal, loss of appetite. I'm not really going to go into breaking down a lot of these. If you guys want to know exactly what it is, you can look it up, or we'll discuss the different conditions that are beneficial whenever we actually do a breakdown of the different cannabinoids in the plant and their medicinal properties. So 1893 to 1894, the Indian Hemp and Drugs Commission issued a 3,500-page report on cannabis, and the commission reported that the uses cannabis were as an analgesic, so as a painkiller, a restorer of energy, a hemostatic agent, so it could actually be used for blood control, an ecbolic, used similar to why we would give drugs to induce birthing contractions, antidiuretic, and then used in treating hay fever, cholera, dysentery, gonorrhea, diabetes, impotence, urinary incontinence, testicular swelling, other ailments. The interesting thing about this report is that they summarized it by saying that cannabis produced virtually no evils. And if the governor wanted to restrict the use of cannabis, the best way to do so would be by taxation. Again, a lot of this came down to regulation, and I'm going to discuss why that's such a big deal. So prior to 1900, the cultivation of cannabis was ubiquitously encouraged in every culture for its myriad of uses. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act required cannabis to be labeled. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act gave the federal government the authority to regulate the trade of narcotics. In 1925, the International Opium Convention banned the export of Indian hemp, but not American or European hemp. In 1932, the Uniform State Narcotic Act encouraged states to adopt authority to regulate the illicit trade of cannabis. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act banned the possession and distribution of hemp outside licensed use. Basically, they issued a marijuana tax stamp and then didn't give anybody the tax stamp. Here you can see just a few examples of cannabis tinctures that were used for medicinal purposes over the years. Hemp has also been used for biomass and fossil fuels. And it has a wide variety of other uses. And so you can see just by looking at this chart for a short amount of time that the use of hemp puts a lot of other industries at risk. And you can see why certain people would want to see this plant regulated. Again, it has agricultural benefits, industrial benefits, medicinal benefits. Hemp can be used for clothing. They've actually come out with hemp products that are similar and stronger to concrete, and they build homes out of hemp and insulate homes with hemp. So let's talk a little bit about how cannabis prohibition came about and who some of the key individuals were in making that happen. Some of these names you may be familiar with, some you may not. All of your allopathic medical schools were initially started by the Rockefeller Foundation. And some of these other names we'll go into because they're all related. So one individual who stood to lose from cannabis being a legal cash crop in the United States was John D. Rockefeller. He created a monopoly on the petroleum market, and he is actually one of the main reasons why the United States passed anti-monopoly laws. Standard Oil was disbanded and broken up, and then out of that we ended up with companies referred to as the Seven Sisters. That's your Shell, Exxon, Mobil, all those. So they basically just redistributed the wealth of that company and the commerce of that company to a number of other rich and wealthy people that were in the same club. Rockefeller was a huge supporter of alcohol prohibition, and a lot of that had to do with his involvement in the petroleum industry, because when alcohol was made illegal, people were forced to run their cars on gasoline instead of farm-made ethanol. When the 22nd Amendment was repealed, Rockefeller faced similar competition from hemp, and so he shifted his focus. Rudolf Diesel was the inventor of the diesel engine. It originally used hemp oil to fuel it. Rockefeller had an invested interest in keeping the environmentally friendly renewable source of energy out of the picture. And there were other major industries that stood to lose as well, as you can tell from the previous charts. A 1938 edition of Popular Mechanics actually claimed that over 25,000 products could be made from hemp, everything from cellophane to dynamite. Henry Ford even made a car out of hemp fiber that was lighter and 10 times stronger than steel, and it ran on hemp ethanol. Here you can see a quote by Henry Ford: "Why use up the forests which were centuries in the making, and the mines which required ages to lay down, if we can get the equivalent of forest and mineral products and the annual growth of the hemp fields?" Lamont DuPont II. DuPont had actually invented cellophane, and you've got cellophane wrap in your kitchen, and it's made as a petroleum product. It was about to become the standard packaging for most American goods. They had also invented nylon thread, which was a carbon-based product that came from chemicals found in petroleum, and that's according to the American Oil and Gas Historical Society. Hemp fiber was the first plastic to be made with plant oils, which could become a competition for DuPont's products. So that's how he's involved. Andrew Mellon was the former United States Secretary of the Treasury. He was actually a Secretary of the Treasury under President Herbert Hoover, and he was owner of the sixth largest bank at the time, which was Mellon Bank. His bank was the primary financial support of a petrochemical company by the name of DuPont. DuPont was delivering and patenting many different forms of synthetics, including fossil fuels, synthetic rubber, plastics, rayon, and paint that General Motors used to paint their cars. Mellon Bank was most heavily invested in DuPont's sulfur-based products of turning wood fiber into usable paper. In 1916, Mellon's investment began to look like a money pit when the U.S. Department of Agriculture chief scientist processed paper from hemp pulp and concluded that paper from hemp was favorable in comparison with those made from wood pulp. The paper produced by hemp fibers did not yellow over time, unlike the chemical-drenched paper that was being produced at the time from trees. An acre of hemp produces more paper than an acre of regular trees. Strangely enough, the actual production of hemp fiber in the United States continued to decline until 1933 to around 500 tons per year, but this is no coincidence. William Randolph Hearst. In the 1930s, Hearst invested heavily into thousands of acres of timberland to make wood pulp for most of the newspaper industry. He was the owner of a large newspaper that was read by more than 20 million U.S. citizens in 18 key cities. He was arguably one of the most powerful men in American history. Since Hearst didn't want any competition from hemp paper, he had to do something about it. So he teamed up with DuPont, who was providing Hearst with the chemicals he used to preserve his paper at the time, and together they would make hemp illegal. The DuPont Corporation was persistently lobbying in Washington, D.C., and while Hearst began a racist smear campaign in his newspapers, a quote from one of his papers stated that marijuana influenced Negroes to look white people in the eye, step on white men's shadows, and look at white women twice. He was basically saying that the plant was going to cause people to intermarry and interbreed. So cannabis prohibition was actually fueled by racist thoughts and fears. Hearst newspaper was the fuel for the fire to prohibition of marijuana. He painted cannabis as an extremely dangerous drug and convinced millions of Americans that the harmless plant was in fact evil. Films like Reefer Madness had the public health blaming cannabis from everything from car accidents to death. And that culture and stigma hasn't changed much today. This brings us to Harry J. Anslinger, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which was an agency of the United States Department of the Treasury. It was established in 1932 by an act of consolidating the functions of the Federal Narcotics Control Board and the Narcotic Division. Andrew Mellon appointed his niece's husband, Harry J. Anslinger, as the chief of the newly consolidated agency when it was formed. Anslinger testified before Congress saying that marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. Most marijuana smokers are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing results from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes. He often used propaganda stories run by Hearst newspaper while he was lobbying. Anslinger ordered the Treasury Department's General Counsel, Herman Oliphant, to secretly begin drafting a bill that would slip easily through both Congress and the court. After 2 years, the FBN proposed the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which placed a tax on the sale of cannabis. Anslinger disguised the act as a tax revenue bill and pushed it through the House by introducing it directly to the House by the Ways and Means Committee. This is the only committee that can introduce a bill to the House floor without it being debated by other committees, and the chairman happened to be an ally of DuPont, Robert Dalton. It was later seen by another DuPont ally, Pentis Brown, in the State Finance Committee, where it was stamped into law. That same year, DuPont patented a new fabric called nylon, which Andrew Mellon was also heavily invested in. The American Medical Association wasn't always against cannabis. For years, it was prescribed for various ailments. So the AMA opposed the act because the tax punished physicians prescribing cannabis, retail pharmacists selling cannabis, and medical cannabis cultivation. They claimed that the bill had been prepared in secret without giving proper time to prepare their opposition, and many were completely unaware that the bill was about hemp because the word marijuana had only been used in a song before that time. The AMA also argued against the FBN's claim that marijuana was addictive or a violent drug that carried a threat for overdosing. Later in 1967, President Johnson commented on the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. He said the act raises an insignificant amount of revenue that exposes an insignificant number of marijuana transactions to the public view since only a handful of people are registered under the act. It has become, in effect, solely a criminal law imposing sanctions upon people who sell, acquire, or possess marijuana. Subsequently, part of the act was ruled unconstitutional in the 1969 case Leary versus the United States because it violated our Fifth Amendment by forcing a person to incriminate oneself to attain a tax stamp. Congress was not happy about the ruling. As a result, they passed the Controlled Substances Act as Title II of the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970. The Comprehensive Act required the pharmaceutical industry to maintain physical security and strict record keeping for certain types of drugs, It classified drugs into 5 different schedules, Schedule 1 being the hardest of drugs, based on their potential for abuse, which is undefined in the Act, current accepted medical use, and accepted safety under medical supervision. Marijuana was classified as a Schedule 1 drug by the pharmaceutical industry, claiming the drug had no proven medical benefits and is an addictive and dangerous drug. Today, marijuana still holds a classification above methamphetamine. But why? Why would the pharmaceutical industry, the same companies who in the early 1900s produced hemp medicine for decades, make a claim like that? Because you can't patent a plant. 50% of people who use CBD products stop using pharmaceutical drugs. For this reason, there was no interest by the major pharmaceutical companies to support further research or development of the plant. There was simply no money in it for them. As a matter of fact, the legalization of cannabis would actually be detrimental to their business, similar to the situation facing the paper and fabric industries. This is why cannabis prohibition is lobbied so heavily in government. The facts are right in front of us. Cannabis does save lives. When you consider everything that the cannabis plant can do, it's apparent why it's classified the way that it is and remains federally illegal. Pharmaceuticals are big business, and legalizing cannabis means losing hundreds of billions of dollars to a single, naturally occurring plant that anybody could grow in their backyard. The same goes for the hundreds of businesses in the paper and fabric industries that would lose profits to hemp subsidies. This is all about money. That's why stories of an 8-month-old child being cured of brain cancer from cannabis oil will never make the headline news. I encourage everybody to look up the story behind Charlotte's Web CBD oil and Charlotte Figge, who suffers from Dravet syndrome. Despite all of this, the United States held a patent on cannabis for a number of years. It has since expired. It's U.S. patent number 6630507B1, and it classifies cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. Oxidation contributes to cell aging. Neuroprotectant, if we break that down, cannabis actually protects the nervous system from degradation. The patent claims exclusive rights on the use of cannabinoids for treating neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and stroke, and diseases caused by oxidative stress, such as heart attacks, Crohn's disease, diabetes, and arthritis. The 10 leading causes of death in the United States in 2012 were heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, diabetes, suicide, influenza pneumonia, stroke, kidney disease, chronic lower respiratory disease, and unintentional injuries. The fact is, cannabis is not as dangerous as the claims that are made, and over 130 people die every day from opioid-related drug overdoses. But you don't see cannabis even making this list. You got it. Cannabis is actually safer than peanuts. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this brief history on the prohibition of cannabis, and I hope that you'll follow my channel for the continuation of this series, where we'll dive into the medicinal benefits of cannabis and some of the medicinal properties of the different cannabinoids, as well as the conditions that can be helped from the use of cannabis. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. If you would, please leave a comment in the comments section below, give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Let me know how cannabis has affected your life. If you've had any benefits from the use of the plant medicinally, or maybe some of the stigma that you've had to deal with in your own life. The medical cannabis community is absolutely amazing. Some of the most friendly people that I've met, have been advocating for years for the medicinal use of cannabis in the United States, and our fight's not over. Aside from NORML and other agencies like the Arkansas Medical Cannabis Association, there are business owners, professionals, and healthcare providers all over the country and all over the world who are conducting research and advocating for the sensible use of cannabis medicinally. Thanks to movements that have aided in the deregulation of hemp and cannabis, we now have the ability to make industrial hemp products that are sustainable and environmentally friendly. And we hope to see this improve over the years as access and research becomes more readily available. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.